Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. For those of you that might be new to this format, this is one where we take live questions from our audience. Also, any questions that are sent in to our email address, webinar@evoketherapy.com, go to the top of the queue. You can always send in requests, questions, suggestions to that email address, and the questions that come in will be answered in the next broadcast, the next podcast that gets released. Even if you're not a subscriber and a live audience member, your questions will still be answered, and you can listen for them on the podcast, which is usually uploaded about half a day after we broadcast the next morning. So webinar@evoketherapy.com is the one to go for that. So with that, let's get into the pre-submitted questions. Anyone who's live, please feel free to drop those questions at any time, and then Steve and Maddie, who are facilitating for me, will post them in the order that they are received. Somebody writes, I've been a regular listener for several years, and my daughter has been in a therapeutic boarding school for 20 months. I'm nearly a year into EMDR and finally seeing some improvement with my dysregulation and panic symptoms. My therapy has addressed some of the crisis situations with our daughter, but continues to return to the root struggles involving unhealthy family dynamics from my childhood to the present. My daughter's adoption and mental health struggles have been the catalyst for a good bit of conflict with my parents over the past few years. Decades in the making, of course. It's not really about my daughter. There were two back-to-back events recently where my parents deeply hurt me that did not involve my daughter. In past conversations, when I bring up ways in which my parents have hurt me, each time they dismiss me as misunderstanding or place blame back on me as my fault for being hurt in the first place. For many years, beginning in childhood, I accepted the blame, absorbed the conflict, and wrote apology letters to avoid feeling rejected by my parents. But I'm working to break the pattern now. As I have focused on my own healing and relationships with my children for the past couple of years during conflicts with my parents, I've stated that I don't have the bandwidth to more deeply address or seek healing for hurts my parents caused, as doing so has left me feeling unheard and blamed, caused me more anxiety, and not help change their behavior. Is there a point that I stop protecting myself from the hurt and try to remain present and able to have a deeper conversation with them about these hurts? I feel confused and unable to stick with my boundaries. I'm in conflict with my parents when I'm in conflict with my parents, but I don't want to continue to refuse addressing hurts and more deeply on the chance that at some points maybe it would be helpful and my parents would change. How do we leave room for people to change while also allowing space for ourselves to do what we need to do to heal? What a fantastic lead up and fantastic question. So I'm going to take several parts of this. Okay. First of all, that's not an uncommon experience. I cannot tell you, I cannot tell all of you how common your experience is. In fact, when we run our therapeutic intensives, in fact, I haven't suggested this yet on this broadcast, but I'm going to suggest it now. When we run our therapeutic intensives, we have that experience that you're describing almost with every client. There's a portion of the intensive where you go back in time, you time travel, you imagine yourself time travel, and you go back and you talk to people playing the roles. Your parents aren't there, of course, but people playing the roles in this dramatic reenactment of your parents at a certain point in your life, and you from the future, from today, you go back to them and tell them how it felt to be a child in their home. Tell them how you were hurt. You can tell them about your gratitude as well, but oftentimes the unspoken hurts are the things that get lodged in us, get stuck in us, and create the problem. So you have that experience. Then you have the opportunity to reverse roles, to stand in the place of your mother and your father, and to respond. And the prompt that we give is, how do you think your parents would have responded to that if you go back to the age of 8 example? How would your parents have responded to that in that year that you were 8 years old? And oftentimes people say, well, I don't know, but I'll just coach them. We'll just coach them. We'll say, just give your best guess. What does it feel like? How do you imagine they would respond? And inevitably, what you described is what happens. And really, what you're describing is you're describing the immaturity, the narcissistic tendencies of your parent. You're describing the ego of your parents, that they need to be good. And so when I talk to all of you about letting go of the ego and letting go of the idea of being good, and that you don't get to win anymore or be good, but you get to be a self which is so much better. I'm talking about it in your context as a parent, but it's the same context that we grew up in, right? We grew up in a context where it wasn't okay. Our parents were fragile, so fragile, and their egos were so dominant that the one shared I often say the one shared belief, idea in dysfunctional families is the idea that the parents have to be good. So what you're saying is practically everywhere. Obviously, there are exceptions to it, but I cannot tell you how common what you're describing is. So, going forward with your question, how do you find this balance? And the answer to the question is you don't have to. See, here's the challenge. I don't advocate or suggest lightly the idea of cutting your parents off for anybody ever. I believe that that through hurts and disappointments and trauma that we can heal in the context of the relationship with our parents even more effectively or efficiently if they're available to it. But if you keep going back and you've made the attempt, eventually part of the decision is you don't have to be around them anymore. And even the idea, parents tell me this all the time, even the idea that that would be abandoning your parents is itself a little bit off center. In a very fundamental way, we really can't or don't abandon our parents. We just go away. Abandonment really applies to the child. You know, we can abandon our children. The parent-child relationship is different than other relationships in this one very important way that it is a kind of one-way relationship, that the parent is always the adult, always the container. And I don't mean as you become adults, you can have conflicts where people share accountability. That happens. But I guess I would just put out the idea that you don't have to. You don't have to hold space for them. You can if you want to. You can if you can. That wasn't an accident. I meant to say that. You can if you can. And what I mean by that is you get to decide what works for you. I'm not going to suggest it one way or the other, but I do know this. When we show up to situations, conversations, relationships because we should, not because we want to, we often end up being abused or abusing other people. So if it's because you have some obligation or a good daughter or a good person would do this, or even the fear that if you model this for your children that they might do it to you, if any of those imperatives, those shoulds enter into the equation, you're likely to suffer abuse or end up lashing out at them in abusive ways. But yes, you know, the our children as they grow up will expose our emotional immaturity. I wrote a quote some years ago where I was talking about this idea of gaslighting. Gaslighting is not a new dynamic, of course. We've just introduced that term into pop culture. What comes from a movie with Ingrid Bergman back in the 1930s, I believe, is when it was filmed. It's actually an interesting movie. It's worth watching. Gives you some context for that ubiquitous word gaslighting that we use. But I wrote something and I said, you know, nearly all parents gaslight their children. And I said, I myself am guilty of this more than I would like to admit, more than I would like to know. And the real courage, the real work is to kill your own ego, to let go, to be who you are, to accept the responsibility of what you do. And that's why psychotherapy and specifically our therapeutic intensives that we offer, the one that we offer for everybody called Finding You, is such a great option because you get to practice it and you can experience vicarious healing through these role plays that we do, both as a participant and an observer. And you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked. Most people say, well, my childhood wasn't that bad, or other people have more serious traumas than I do. And so mine don't deserve that sensitivity or attention. But again, whose voice do you think that is? I wrote something also not so long ago because when I talk about going back, my favorite quote or one of my favorite quotes from Alice Miller from the drama of The Gifted Child. By the way, I would encourage you to take a look at that because that will speak very clearly to what you're describing. One of my favorite quotes about mental health, mental illness is from the first page on the drama The Gifted Child, where Dr. Miller says, um, we have learned that the one thing in our experience, the one thing that we have to mitigate mental illness is the discovery of the unique experience of our emotional childhood. I butchered that a little bit. It's not an exact quote. In our experience, she said that we have only one enduring weapon in our fight against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique emotional history of our childhood. And when I read that, there are a large swath of human beings that hear me talk about that or hear her talk about that and say, well, that's just somebody looking to somebody to blame, somebody that's a victim. But I will tell you that energy, that avoidance of going backwards often means that you're still carrying your parents' ego. I saw a meme a couple of years ago, shared it with one of my colleagues that I really care about. And the meme said something like this. It says, you know, when if I tell people that my father would mistreated me, everybody says, "Oh my gosh, he's such a jerk." You know, screw him kind of energy. But when I tell people my mother hurt me, people will often say, I bet she loved you. I'm sure she loved you. She did the best that she could." So even perfect strangers who have absolutely no experience, zero experience in observing your childhood will fall into that pattern because of their background. So I was sharing this quote, this little meme, with a colleague of mine. And she thought about it for a few seconds and she said to me, "No, I don't think that's true of my childhood. I don't think that's true of my mother." And I said, "Okay." You know, I thought it was fairly common, but okay, I accept that. And after a few more seconds of pausing, she said, "Actually, I just imagined posting this quote on my own social media timeline. And the first thought I had was that my mother would get hurt by it." So she was still, when we chuckled about that, she was still protecting her mother, but it was unconscious. It is critical. There are two tasks. I always talk about the early task of attachment, which is security and presence and welcoming and connection and attunement and safety and meeting their needs. That's the early stage of attachment. And if that doesn't get met, then there are real serious consequences. But the second stage in attachment is letting them go, giving them wings. And so much of the therapy that we do in our programs is around that second task. In fact, I think sometimes the conflict, the symptomology, the issues, the mental health issues are often symptomatic, speaking to this inability of parents and children to separate. It is important that we let them go. That health in family systems is not just measured by the kindness and the warmth, but also by the parent's ability or anybody's ability to allow people to leave the family freely and come back freely a larger person. That's not just my quote, I'm borrowing from some other folks. But that idea is critical. And for me, as a father, as difficult as it is, as sensitive as I can be, I know enough to know that one important gift that I can give to my children is that they're allowed to be angry at me and they're allowed to cast me as the villain in their story. And when I allow for that to happen, they don't want to leave. But when I can't tolerate it because my ego is too fragile, because I'm still under the spell of believing and thinking and trying to be good, then I'm not safe and it's they're less likely to be around me. So what you're describing is so common. And I'm glad that you brought it up, and I would just invite you to figure out what works for you. And if you're battling shoulds and shouldn'ts and being a good daughter or a good citizen or whatever it is, work on that in psychotherapy. Guilt and shame. Guilt, not just shame. Everybody kind of knows that shame is the culprit, but guilt is just as dangerous, maybe even more so because it's more subtle. And because we have been taught and indoctrinated in our culture and most cultures that guilt has something to do with your conscience, with morality. More often than not, guilt is at the center of the cause of mental illness because we're told that good daughters would do this and good sons would do this and good friends and good spouses would do this. We feel guilty for setting boundaries. I had an experience this week small experience where I found it difficult to set a boundary with somebody that was violating my space. It was actually at a family gathering, an extended family gathering. And inside, I could feel my rage building. I could feel my animosity building. And I was afraid that if I set a boundary with this extended family member that I had just met, I was afraid that they would feel too hurt and that I would be punished. Right? That's my childhood. If I set a boundary, if I assert myself, and I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm not trying to be unkind, I'm not doing it necessarily in an obnoxious way, but because of that guilt, I stay in a situation which is toxic for me. Now, if I had to spend more time around that person, or if I ever end up spending more time around that person and something like that happens again, I'll have to muster up the courage. I will have to muster up the courage. See, boundaries that we set, and this would be a boundary if you communicated to your parents. Boundaries that we set, they're not walls, they're doors. A boundary is telling somebody that you care about, that you value, how to be in relationship with you. And really, your parents, I mean, I have some anger at them because it's familiar to me and because I've seen it thousands, if not tens and hundreds of thousands of times. I don't like what they're doing to you. So you have my therapeutic permission to do whatever you need to do to either confront them, to draw a line and tell them what you need. I strongly encourage you and everybody else to do a therapeutic intensive. This is the exact kind of work. This is the exact kind of issue. Even when people don't think that this is an issue, this is the issue that comes up and gets processed in our Finding You intensive therapy intensives. So thank you for the question, and you have my support with whatever you need to or want to do. Somebody writes, I would like some understanding on the idea, purpose of inappropriate, intimate photos kids take and share with each other. My child has taken very revealing selfies and shared, which then led to others seeing them as well. Why? Why would any teen want to put themselves in this kind of situation? Well, the first answer that I have, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, is that they only have half a brain. Playfully, we used to refer to teenagers in our family as half brainers, me and my wife and I. And what I mean by that is their prefrontal cortex is not intact. It doesn't exist until somewhere around the age of 25. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that can make decisions, anticipate consequences, see cause and effect as things go forward. So my first answer to your question is because they're missing the part of their brain. They literally doesn't exist, is not online, the part of their brain that would prevent them from doing those things. But the second answer is they just want to be liked. They just want to be liked. And in that hunger to be liked, to be loved, to be adored, they're willing to dismiss any of the warnings and any of the risks. They believe under the spell of needing to be liked and this being the way to do it. They believe that the person on the other end is going to respect their boundaries. And of course, as you know, as we know, that is often not the case. So they need our children who do this, need our patience, need our compassion, just like with all of the mental health issues and symptoms. They need our patience and our compassion. And it's okay to have a boundary around things. You can decide on consequences or boundaries, but it must come, well, ideally, it comes from a place of love and compassion and non-judgment. And sometimes when my children do quote unquote stupid things like this, I can get very reactive. I can get very shaming, actually. In fact, when I talk about shaming responses to children in The Audacity to Be You, that list that I sometimes share that has safe and unsafe responses. One of the unsafe responses that I list is why. Why would you do that? And I have why in italics and bolded in red. And the reason I say that because that's the way I've shamed my children at times. Why would you do something like that? That was your best idea. So you thought that was, I shame them. And really they're a child who wants attention and wants to be loved. And I don't want to be too dramatic, but I do want to include, in part, what they're searching for is something that they felt missing in the relationship between us often. There's this idea in attachment work that if you don't get seen by your parents at the age when it was critical, if you don't get seen by them and attuned and nurtured and taken care of and responded to well, you'll spend your entire life trying to be seen by everybody. And I had to learn that the hard way from experience. I spent my first 40 years trying to be seen by everybody. And it wasn't until after a significant crisis in my life that I surrendered. I gave up. And part of what gave me the strength or the base to be able to stand on that ground that I'm alluding to is I got seen by my therapist. She became the parent that I never had. Therapy became the childhood that I never had. I could come in and still today, I do come in and confess anything stupid, anything ridiculous. And instead of judging me or becoming reactive, she becomes curious. She wants to understand why. She assumes, as James Hollis teaches, the great doctor and writer James Hollis, the psychoanalyst, Jungian psychoanalyst, that there's no such thing as illogical behavior, even with psychosis. Our job as parents and psychotherapists, for that matter, our job is to discover the context where the seemingly irrational behavior makes perfect sense. So it's okay, all of you, to ask questions about your children, to be curious about why they do what they do. But be careful about the shaming and the judgment. That's the real trauma. My proudest moments as a father are when my children have done something really ridiculous and I've responded clearly with boundaries, but I've responded with compassion and non-judgment and a hug. Those are my proudest moments as a father. When I was grounded, when I was safe, when my nervous system was regulated, and it was more important to me to be there in their dilemma, in the dark place that they were at. And there's so many people who talk about, well, I'll have compassion for people, but people who bring the problems on themselves, they deserve it. And that's just cruelty. We all bring problems on ourselves. We all bring consequences on ourselves. We all make mistakes. We are all human. Even recently when I was confessing some mistake I had made in psychotherapy and feeling really guilty about it, I shared this with my therapist and I was expecting her to say, I mean, this is me 25 years into therapy with this woman. So I confessed what I did and she said, "You're being so hard on yourself. You did something very human." And maybe the best thing about your dilemma with your therapy client is you show them what it's like to be messy and to be human. And then you can show them how to move through that and get out of that. But the fear that we have in having such a compassionate response to people's mistakes with which if they continue could become harmful and dangerous to them. The fear that we have is that there'll be no accountability, that the child will feel no shame, right? That phrase, no shame, or maybe even no guilt. And therefore they will continue to be crazy and unhealthy and dangerous and risky to themselves. That's our fear. We have been taught that. But see, child psychology teaches us something very, very different. It teaches us that shame and that guilt becomes the genesis of the mental illness. And that the thing that we were told to be afraid of doesn't exist. In Les Mis, when Jean Valjean gets the candlesticks, the silver candlesticks from the bishop that he just robbed and hit over the head, what happens to him? He changes. He spends the rest of his life in service to a greater love than he had ever experienced. And why is that musical, that show, one of the longest lasting shows on Broadway and in the West End in London, if not the longest running? Why is that so resonant with us? Because we know that it is that kind of grace that opens us up to love. And when I discovered this, when I was in my dark place and I experienced love and compassion, I realized it was heaven. All I wanted to do was spend the rest of my life using all of those that energy and that resource that I had spent on trying to defend myself against being bad. Once that was freed up and I didn't care about being good anymore, and I just wanted to be me, I could apologize more, I could admit to mistakes more, I could be authentic and honest in relationship. I was kinder, I was more loving, I wasn't in competition with people, I didn't step on people on my way up as much. By no means am I perfect. I can still be reactive and triggered for sure, but it taught me that the healing balm is grace. And I'm not talking about it in a religious context whatsoever. For those of you that aren't religious and hear it in that context, because that word often is associated with religions. I'm talking about human to human. And I'm not talking about enabling either. I'm not talking about no boundaries. You can have boundaries. Our brains are so limited that we we create this false dichotomy so often that it's either compassion or boundaries. But you know this, that the goal is both, not either or. And that if you happen to make your way into Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous and do your work in recovery, you will hear both of those messages being preached. You can have your boundaries, it's your responsibility. But you can, in fact, with your boundaries, that's the crazy thing. With your boundaries, you experience more compassion towards other people because you're not resentful. These things are not intuitive. These things are not common sense. These things take work and attention to nuance and ambiguity and uncertainty, and all the black and white turns to gray. But it is what we know about how human beings work. Yes, you can put people under stress of shame and guilt, shoulds and shouldn'ts, and at times they will perform. And then in the short run, that might be more effective in perform. I always talk about when we're hiring somebody, a new employee, and they have shame or guilt issues. My thought is, well, we're going to get some good work out of this person. But you know what we don't get? We don't get somebody that lasts a long time. We get somebody who's defensive when they make mistakes. So the goal is to be whole. Carl Jung said, I would rather be whole than good. And once we learned that there was nothing on the dark side to be afraid of, the only thing that is left is love. When you stop operating out of should and shouldn't, but out of can and can't, you have more love to give. You're overflowing with it. But you have to set your boundaries and you have to take care of yourself. And even though your guilt tells you that it's selfish and you're a bad friend and a bad daughter, you do it anyway. You do it because you know if you don't, you can't love people. You will end up resentful. You'll end up with cancers, with an ulcer, with a weakened heart, literally, because you're swallowing the toxic energy of not taking care of yourself. You deserve compassion. And oftentimes, the sentinels of guilt and shame are the thing standing between you and greater happiness and greater awareness and enlightenment. Looks like that's all the questions we have. I'll give a minute in case anybody changes their mind. Maybe just a minute of pausing. Next person writes in, my daughter is coming home Wednesday after spending 40 days in treatment, and the treatment center is recommending PHP, partial hospitalization program. When my daughter went to treatment, I went into a 30-day treatment center to deal with my own codependence and trauma. So much was uncovered for me, and I'm just understanding why I need boundaries. I'm scared for my daughter to come home. I don't feel ready, but I miss her. I'm looking into a therapeutic boarding school, but it's also expensive. After a couple of days out of treatment, I find myself having a hard time not isolating. I'm tired. I know I need to go to meetings and work on me. Not sure my question, but my daughter is upset with me. I did a lot of grieving my time away, and I'm ready to step into a new relationship with my daughter, and I'm scared. My first response to you is just compassion. And while you might see yourself as very different from me, you're not. So you deserve compassion. You deserve love. What I think I can tell you is that if you're not ready, it's okay. And letting her be mad at you, feel even betrayed by you, is okay. At a more fundamental level than I can possibly describe, letting her be mad and resent you is, in fact, being the best parent that you can be. It means that you can take care of you and she doesn't have to. And sometimes when parents aren't ready for their children to come home, or they feel really guilty, and they feel like, why should my daughter or my son pay for my lack of capacity, my brokenness, my inability, my struggles? And the answer is because that's the way that it works. Children always, always suffer from our lack of capacity. But if you do it trying to make her happy and trying to make her not mad at you, it will come out that you're still taking care of yourself at her expense. So I don't have any opinion about what you do. I don't know your situation and all the details. But what I can tell you is your first responsibility is to yourself. And I say this in my marriage. My wife and I are clear about this. If I don't take care of myself in our marriage will not survive. If I don't take care of myself in my family, in regards to my children, our children will suffer. My children will suffer. So you have an obligation to your daughter second, but you have an obligation to yourself first. And Alice Miller in the book The Drama of the Gifted Child, I'll share you this quote with you. Mind you, The Drama of the Gifted Child is 100% pro children. 100% pro children and their needs. And if you read The Drama of the Gifted Child, I don't care how old you are, I don't care how many children you have, it's imperative that you read it through the lens of being a child, no matter how old you are. Because that's the genesis of the issues. Healing goes from the top down in families, in a lot of cases. But the quote she said, she uses this, she says, a mother that is not particularly nurturing can still provide for the child what the child needs, if only the mother will allow the child to get it from somebody else. So the one who's trumpeting children and children being nurtured and children being cared for and children being supported is still proposing that idea. Even John Bowlby, you don't see it, but my shirt has his name on it. I don't want to lift it up too high. It's an Evoke shirt that I'm wearing today. Even John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, has a long passage where he talks about sometimes it's better for children to go away to boarding school. Back then it was boarding school, not therapeutic boarding school, because that didn't exist back then. But he said because it lowers the temperature. People can be more connected to each other through that distance. So the mother, if you will, of, in my opinion, the best book about children and child development that's ever been written, Alice Miller, The Drama That Gifted Child, and the father of attachment theory, which is how children develop in the context of their parents' ability to provide warmth and nurturing and connection. Those two people give overt permission or suggestions that sometimes having the child not at home is the best thing. So get support, go to your therapist, go to your meetings, secure your own mask first, as we are instructed on our pre-flight safety protocols. Secure your own mask first. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for your daughter. When I share difficult things with my wife that might lead to conflict, I say to myself, it's better than the alternative. And the story I told you at the beginning, where I didn't share that frustration with an extended family member, part of the reason is because I didn't know them, and probably I wouldn't see them again. but my wife matters to me and our children matter to me. So in that context, I have to assert my needs. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer to a question where I don't know all the specifics. I support you either way. Do what you have to do. Get loving support. Find community. Find other people besides your daughter to buoy you up. It's critical that we look for other sources of support. And one of the greatest problems in families is when the child takes care of the parent. I grew up with a single mother, and a dynamic inherent in my childhood trauma was that I had to take care of my mother emotionally. And I cannot tell you the numbers of ways that I paid for that mistake, paid for that dynamic. I'm okay. I'm healing. I'm working on it. We all have stuff, but it costs the child great when the child is used as a mirror to reflect back to the parent that the parent is a good parent. That is the universal problem in the parent-child relationship, not just in this country, but throughout the world. It really is. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the courage of your journey. Any other questions before? Nothing else? All right, folks. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. Let me go into upcoming announcements and resources. We encourage all of you, all current parents and clients, to just experiment with 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups and support groups. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, AdultChildren.org, or RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program with less of an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place for free classes and resources in your local community. Recently, we have partners with Other Parents Like Me. Other Parents Like Me is an online platform built on the foundation of parents supporting parents. They provide 17 weekly Zoom meetings designed for caregivers of teens and young adults facing mental health challenges, led by trained peer parent facilitators. It's an authentic and safe community where parents actively engage, support each other, and find valuable resources. And for a 1-month free premium membership, submit when you're signing up for it the code Finding You. Tell them that you heard about it from the Evoke Therapy podcast or webinar, and you'll get one. What's the harm? Just try it. Just give it a try. It's 1 month for free. You can cancel after that. All right, folks, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You. My 2 books are available on Amazon and Audible. You can go to the website, click on the QR code there, or just go to Amazon. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, June might be full. June was 1 person away from being full. June 19th through 23rd is our next in-person offering for Finding You. July 24th after that. I will be in New York City on July 31st through 4th, hosting an on-site Finding You intensive. So it will be the only Finding You intensive that I will be running in 2024. So if you're interested in attending one with me, July 31st through August 4th, if you're a local in New York City or the surrounding area, that might be the best option for you. Or if you just want to visit New York and do something fun, you can tack on in the beginning or the end the Finding You intensives. And then we have just included our online intensive, which is half the length and about a third of the cost. We've just included it as part of your wilderness therapy registration enrollment. If you have a child, if you're a current parent of our wilderness program, you are invited for free to the online intensive. June 21st through 23rd is the next offering. July 12th through 14th after that. If you'd rather go in person, you can apply the cost of that to the in-person intensives. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. Go to our website or use the QR code. If you want support and you need a support group, this evening, the next support group for current and alumni wilderness families, parents, is tonight, May 23rd at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then next week at May 30th, 7 p.m. For just our alumni parents of our wilderness program, we have a meeting once a month for you. For those of you that are farther along, July 17th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then for our intensives and coaching clients and alumni, June 10th is your next support group at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com, use the QR code, or go to our website for more information. If you would like to work with a therapeutic coach or an Evoke coach, and you've always wanted to do therapy and you want to be matched up to a therapist, our coaching services are a wonderful option for you. These are for parents, couples, families, or individuals, clarifying boundaries, stage of life, anxiety, depression, trauma. All the issues that you would work with in therapy are available in our virtual coaching services. Contact Coaching at Evoke Therapy to go to our website to be matched up with a therapist or a coach that's a right fit for you. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just go to that app and search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. Like us, subscribe there. You'll be notified when the new episodes drop. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and you can listen to the broadcast there. Also, you can watch the video rebroadcasts of the video versions of these on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find the Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. We have a wonderful blog that our staff, therapists, employees contribute to. And what I love about our blog is it's people sharing about their own wellness journey, not just giving you advice and telling you the way that it is, but talking about their own realizations, their own messy, human, fallible, beautiful human experiences. So check it out. My next broadcast will be next Tuesday, May 28th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm going to be talking about ego and soul. I'm really looking forward to this broadcast. I love talking about ego and soul and what that means and the metaphor that it is and how it can inform us and help us in our lives and bring us greater peace and happiness and joy. All right, folks. Like I said, I hope this is a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. You doing that makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.